All right, guys, I'm just going to warn you. Today's episode is going to be controversial, uncomfortable, and real as a motherfucker because we're talking about gender affirming care, the Supreme Court case that could make or break access to it, and the absolute hypocrisy surrounding this debate. Look, whether you agree with gender affirming care or not, this case isn't just about trans kids. It's about who gets to make medical decisions, doctors and families, or politicians who wouldn't know the difference between an IUD and some kind of explosive device. But before we go any further, let's clear something up. What exactly is gender affirming care? For those of you who don't know, some people immediately hear that phrase and think it means surgeries for kids. It doesn't, y'all. Gender affirming care is just health care. That's it. Medical care that helps people who experience gender dysphoria. That's when someone whose gender identity doesn't match the sex they were assigned at birth. And it's not one size fits all. For minors, it's typically things like puberty blockers. These are reversible medications that pause puberty so kids have more time to figure out their identity before permanent changes are made, like deepening voice or breast development take place. Hormone therapy is another thing. This is for older teens and helps align physical traits with their gender identity, but only after a very thorough medical evaluation and parental consent. Also, therapy and counseling to help trans kids navigate their experiences, just like any other kid going through this phase of life. So what is gender affirming care is not. It is not surgery for young kids. This is not happening, guys, no matter what people try to scare you into believing. Doctors handing out hormones like candy. There are very strict regulations. This isn't some casual walk in and get a prescription situation. But now, states like Tennessee have passed laws banning all of this for minors, even with parental approval, even when doctors say it's the best treatment for the patient. And now, the Supreme Court is deciding whether those bans should stand. So today we're talking about why this case matters. What happens when trans kids are denied care? And the straight up hypocrisy of the people leading this charge. So buckle up. All right, let's start with the facts. In 2023, Tennessee passed Senate Bill 1, SB 1, a law that bans gender affirming care for minors that included puberty blockers, hormone therapy, gender affirming medical treatments of any kind, even if doctors recommend it, even if parents approved it, even if that care is literally changing and saving that kid's life. So families immediately bristled and challenged the law, arguing that it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The case has been working its way through the courts ever since. Let me give you a little life cycle of this guy. First, a federal judge temporarily blocked the ban, saying it likely discriminates against transgender youth. But then the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that ruling, allowing the ban to take effect again. Now, the case, United States versus Scarbetti, is before the Supreme Court, which will decide if states have the right to ban gender-affirming care altogether. And make no mistake, this ruling could set the stage for laws across the entire country. Even if you live in a state that supports trans rights, this case could change everything, guys. And here's the kicker. The entire ban is based on fear-mongering and bad science. Thanks a lot, government. The politicians pushing these bans love to preach about parental rights, don't they? Until those parents are preaching about the parental rights of their trans kids. It's wild, really. The same people who scream about how the government should stay out of our lives are now saying that the government has the final say in a deeply personal and medical decision. Make it make sense for me, fellas. And look, I'm not here to tell you how to feel about gender affirming care. I get that not everyone understands it or agrees with it. But if we're going to have this conversation, we need to be honest about what's actually happening. And a whole lot of the arguments being thrown around are built on hypocrisy and antiquated information. You ever notice how the same politicians who say the government shouldn't tell me what to do with my body when it comes to COVID vaccines, masks, and reproductive rights are the same ones pushing for a total government takeover of trans healthcare? They fought against vaccine mandates because medical decisions should be personal. They fought against school mask mandates because parents should have the right to decide what's best for their kids. They fought against gun restrictions because freedom means letting people make their own choices. But suddenly, when it comes to trans kids, personal choice doesn't apply anymore. So let me get this straight. You can refuse a vaccine during a global pandemic. You can refuse life-saving medical care because of bodily autonomy. But a trans kid can't take a medication that's been approved by their doctor and their parents have signed off on it? Y'all, the math ain't mathin' for me. The second thing is puberty blockers are dangerous. That's one of the big things that you hear. One of the biggest fear-mongering tactics is the idea that puberty blockers are new and experimental. Y'all, they are not. They have been around for decades and are regularly used to treat precocious puberty, which is when a child starts puberty too early. We're talking like ages 6 or 7. No one ever made a big deal about this. Trans kids needed them. So let's talk about what these medications actually do. First of all, puberty blockers are not permanent. They pause puberty, giving kids more times to make decisions, like I was saying earlier. If they stop taking them, puberty resumes as normal. These medications have been approved and studied for years, and major medical organizations, including the Endocrine Society and the American Academy of Pediatrics, support their use for gender dysphoria. But instead of listening to doctors, politicians with zero medical background are out here claiming that puberty blockers are dangerous and untested. Y'all, these are the same people who think the power of prayer can wash away gayness. It just doesn't work. Next point that I want to make is one of the most repeated claims in these debates is that most kids grow out of being trans by adulthood. This argument is so old. It's based on these super antiquated studies that dated back to the 1970s. The study they're referring to claims that 61 to 98% of kids who experience gender dysphoria end up identifying as cisgender later on. I don't know about you, but anytime I've had to cite research articles for school or college, we weren't allowed to use articles that were more than 5 years old because that's how quickly information changes. So how are some of the most powerful and persuasive individuals in America using 50-year-old research to support their arguments? Many of those studies that they're referencing didn't even focus on kids with actual gender dysphoria. They included any child who exhibited gender non-conforming behavior, meaning like a boy who liked dolls or a girl who liked playing rough. Honestly, the lack of exclusionary and inclusionary data for this study would be openly mocked in today's research circles, meaning the research was flawed, the results were skewed, and the study was shit. So let's fast forward 50 years and check out what more recent studies show. And wouldn't you know it, studies that are within this century actually suggest that the vast majority of socially transitioned kids continue to identify as transgender into adulthood. A 2020 study found that 94% of trans kids still identified as trans 5 years later. 5 years, y'all. That's not a phase. That's a life. So next time you hear someone say, most trans kids grow out, where's your research from? The 1970s? Because that argument is bogus and bullshit. The last thing that I want to mention is this argument that you'll hear tons of people say that people regret transitioning. And yeah, sure, some people do detransition, but let's actually look at the reasons why. A 2021 study found that 2.4% of trans people detransition because they regret transitioning. The rest, the remaining 98.6, I'm not good at math, they stopped because of external pressures. External pressures like discrimination, lack of family support, or financial barriers. Many people wanted to keep transitioning but couldn't because society made it too fucking hard. So when people say that we should ban gender-affirming care because kids will regret it, should we apply that same logic to other medical treatments? Do we ban knee replacements because patients regret getting them, or cancer treatments because some people don't like the side effects? No, we let people make their own medical choices. And yet, for trans people, we're expected to throw out all logic and ban life-affirming care because some homophobic white guy in the 1970s published some erroneous research. This isn't about safety. It's about control. It's about someone enforcing their personal beliefs onto the lives of everyone else. Denying care doesn't make trans kids less trans. It just makes them more likely to suffer. Studies show that trans youth who are denied access to gender-affirming care have significantly higher rates of depression, self-harm, and suicide. You take away this care, and kids are killing themselves, guys. One of the plaintiffs in this Supreme Court case we're talking about, a 16-year-old girl named LW, has been on hormone therapy and describes it as life-changing. But because of Tennessee's law, her family now has to drive out of state just so she can keep her treatment. Imagine that. Imagine needing a life-changing medication and being told you not only have to leave your home, your town, but your state just to get it. That's what's at stake in this Supreme Court case. And if they rule against trans rights, this will become the new normal nationwide. At the end of the day, this case isn't just about trans kids. It's about who gets to decide what healthcare is allowed. Patients, doctors, and families, or politicians and policies. We have a choice to make. And if we let them take away this care, what's next? Until next time, guys, stay safe, stay curious, and always choose kindness.